Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Babbling Irons match preview with myself today. Aston Villa away. We just went up there in the FA Cup and unfortunately lost 2-1. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. It was obviously Graham Potter's first game in charge of West Ham as well. So he's had a few games now. It's going to be interesting to see how we set up. We know we've got injuries. We know there's a lot of stuff going on. We've got red cards, injuries, lack of transfer activity. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Graham Potter does this. And also Unai Emery, they're coming off the back of a defeat to Monaco in the Champions League. They obviously got a good point at Aston Villa at Arsenal, and it's going to be interesting to see how he approaches that game as well, because Aston Villa also have some injuries to battle against. But before we get into it, just wanted to give a tail of the tape and look at how things are right now. So Villa on 36 points in the league. We are 26, 33 goals scored for Aston Villa, 27 for West Ham, 34 goals conceded for Aston Villa, 43 for West Ham, while Aston Villa find himself in 8th position in the Premier League, West Ham in 14th. When we look at the expected stats, Villa are almost on track for where they should be in terms of the number of points. They're slightly below on XG. So expected points of 35.89, West Ham 21.58, a big discrepancy there. Expected goals scored, Villa 39.96 to West Ham's 31.52. Expected goals conceded of 32.32 for Aston Villa. West Ham 46.44, really high there. One of the worst in the division. And Aston Villa are expected to be in 6th, whilst they are in 8th. And West Ham are expected to be in 15th, while we find ourselves in 14th. So, yeah, on paper, Aston Villa should be higher than where they currently are. And on paper, West Ham should be marginally lower than where they are. But pretty much both teams are quite similar, quite on track with how their season's progressed. And the expected data looks pretty parallel to what they're performing in terms of the actual statistics and the actual results that we're seeing in the Premier League. So, yeah, this is going to be a really tough game. We already know it's going to be a tough game. We saw it a couple of weeks ago in the FA Cup. I'm hoping that Somerville's going to be back for this game. As of recording this, we haven't got confirmation whether he is going to be fit, but it's the kind of sources are suggesting that he is going to be ready for this game, which will be a massive boost to that front line. And yeah, we know that Mavropanos is going to be out of a red card, but let's kind of shift our focus to Aston Villa for a second before we take a look at the battle between the two teams, because Aston Villa have done fantastically well over the past couple of seasons. You know, it wasn't too long ago we were playing them in a relegation battle, 6-pointer in COVID, and yeah, it's crazy to think how far both clubs have come in that short period. Obviously, West Ham have started to regress a little bit, but Aston Villa in the last couple of seasons have been fantastic, and obviously Unai Emery has been a massive part of that. And at the time, it was considered a gamble to bring in Unai Emery, and I think he's definitely shown his credibility at Aston Villa so far. And let's take a look at some of the stats from their season so far, as they've also been in Champions League. But in the Premier League, they've got the 11th best defensive record in the Premier League with 33 goals scored. So not a goal scoring machine by any means. They have the 7th best expected offensive record in the Premier League with 36.96. So they are slightly underperforming in front of goal. They have the 8th weakest defensive record in the Premier League with 34 goals conceded. So something to consider going into this game. They rank 6th for expected points, as I showed before. They're averaging around 1.5 goals per game. They're averaging over 1.55 goals conceded per game. And they average around 50% possession in the Premier League so far this season. So definitely, I wouldn't say it's been Aston Villa's strongest performance this season. But when you take into consideration that they do have Champions League football to battle, and, you know, West Ham fans experienced it, you know, when we first got back into Europe or first got into European competitions under David Moyes, we were doing pretty well in the league, but we started to fizzle out because our squad wasn't big enough. I actually don't think Aston Villa's squad's that big. I think it's decent, but it's not huge. It's not like a team that's traditionally used to playing, you know, Wednesday, Saturday, or in West Ham's case, Thursday, Sunday. And we saw at West Ham, it really took its toll in the second half of the season. We're now entering that phase with Aston Villa. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because they are likely to go through in the Champions League. They're likely to make it to the knockout rounds. So that's going to be more fixtures, more congestion as we move forwards into the later stages of this season. But yeah, when you look at Aston Villa, I mean, Unai Emery's done a fantastic manager. And one of the things we've always given him credit for, whether it's playing West Ham or whenever he's been playing, whenever Aston Villa have been playing, is he will make changes. He will be able to see things in a game where he can tactically impact a game. And it's something that's quite rare in coaching these days. You know, coaches have this philosophy, this way of playing, this idea, this identity, this style. But when it's not going their way, how does a manager then adjust that? There's only a few really of the best managers really, when you think about them, that have the ability to do that on a regular basis and find solutions to in-game problems. And it's something I think that's massively underappreciated by coaches, and Unai Emery in particular. He's someone that isn't scared to change things up, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. But look, Aston Villa absolutely should be really happy with this, with the progress that they've made. It'd be interesting to hear anything from the Aston Villa fans about how they feel their season's going. But I guarantee the majority are just happy to be in that Champions League, and if the further they can go in the Champions League, that's going to be their main priority. Obviously, you want to finish strong in the league and try and get at least a European spot, because they've now got European football 2 seasons in a row. But for the main part, it's about Champions League football, or at least it would be from my perspective, because playing Champions League football doesn't come around often, and playing Champions League football where you've got a real chance of going through in the knockouts and actually going quite far in the competition is rare in football, and it's rare for football fans as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they do cope with the balance. But Unai Emery, as I mentioned, is a fantastic manager, and we've seen it against West Ham in recent seasons. The flexibility he has and the flexibility that he will change in game to make things a win situation for him is it's very, I would say, unprecedented, especially in the Premier League, where, as I said before, coaches will have a set style of playing, but they won't necessarily have the tools or ability to adapt to certain situations on a consistent basis. But Unai Emery is able to do that. When we look at West Ham and Graham Potter, it's very early days. What we have seen over this past couple of weeks is more of a identity or a style, as I'm kind of referring to before, of how we want to play and what we're trying to do. Obviously, there's going to be huge nuances to this that is coming mid-season. There's been no signings yet as of recording this, or no real big signings. He's got a lot of injuries to deal with. He's got a squad that's completely adept of any confidence or, to be honest, quality at the moment. We've really lacked quality within that first 11 and squad. And he's got, as I mentioned, injuries to some really key players. I'm hoping Somerville is one of those to return, because he was actually someone that was really bright in that opening Graham Potter game for West Ham against Aston Villa in the FA Cup. And he was key to everything we're doing offensively and defensively in that first half before he came off injured. We know that Fulkirk was also playing really well in that game, but he's subsequently got injured because of that hamstring tear. And now we're in a situation where we're trying to adapt and find solutions, whilst also coaching the players on a new mentality, a new structure, a new system. And it's really interesting, Amorim from Manchester United, he came in and he's said it in his press conferences recently that, there's a nervousness about Manchester United. The fans can feel it, he can feel it, and he's very open about that. And I found that quite interesting, because I think with West Ham, we've often seen that lack of confidence or that nervousness in certain situations this season has been very prominent, and it's something that we need to address and something Graham Potter needs to install into the team. But yeah, I mean, we're coming off the back of a defeat to Crystal Palace. It was a really poor game for anyone that was at the London Stadium. Really flat atmosphere because of the performance. We didn't register a shot on target. So yes, we had more of the possession, but I think Crystal Palace did a fantastic defensive job on us. And, it's going to be a very different game. Aston Villa versus Crystal Palace, very different. You're going to Villa Park. You're going to expect Villa to be, on the front foot. We know they play the high line as well, so there's going to be space in behind. But as I mentioned, not only do Villa have a quality manager, they have quality within their squad. Ollie Watkins, John Duran, which I'm not going to mention, also to come off the bench. They've got players like Leon Bailey, who hasn't been performing that well this season, but is still a very good player. They've got, the likes of Morgan Rogers, Ramsey, who I really, really like. They've got just an abundance of quality. One player they are going to be missing, who West Ham did try and sign a couple of seasons back, is Onana. I think he's a big, big miss for them. He's been absolutely fantastic. And he's that type of player that if West Ham could sign someone right now to go into that midfield, that is the profile we need. A ball winner, a ball carrier, a disruptor, an engine in the midfield, and just someone to bring a little bit of a presence and tenacity and, as I said, energy to that midfield. That's what we're currently lacking. So it's going to be a big miss for them. But obviously, they'll probably play Kamara, Tillemans, maybe bring in Buendia into that midfield three. So they have options and they have quality to hurt West Ham. So defensively, we're going to have to be careful. I think in the first half in the FA Cup against Aston Villa a couple of weeks ago, we performed really, really well. Defensively, Aston Villa didn't have a shot. Again, they were too passive. Emery changed things, as I mentioned, at half time and got the best out of his team. But we were way too passive in the second half. But the first half, we were fantastic. We were aggressive. We set off when we needed to, but we were disciplined, organised, and then we broke in numbers and created chances off of the back of that. You know, as I mentioned, Fulcrook and Somerville were really key to that. So I'm hoping Somerville's going to be back for this one. But yeah, when we're looking at that FA Cup game, there are areas where we need to be very careful because in the second half, Villa completely dominated the game. They just took control and we lost our attacking threat with the substitutions that we made, with fatigue setting in. So how do we kind of alleviate some of that pressure going into the second half against Villa again? That's a big question for Graham Potter. And obviously, the in game circumstance will be different, or it may be different. We may not be 1-0 up at half time. So, yeah, there's going to be a few things to change. But let's switch over to the lineups or the predicted lineups or what could be, because there's a few things to note from this. And the first thing is how West Ham are going to set up. You know, we've got injuries at the back. I don't want to call it a crisis, but we have one fit centre back. Obviously, Mavropanos is suspended for this one. Tadebo's not fit. So really, it's just Max Kilman in that back three. Probably expect Fabianski to stay in goal, but in terms of the back three, you're looking at Kilman, you're looking at Souček, Alvarez, sorry, and you're looking at Wan-Bissaka. So these are the three players that I would expect to be in the back three. I think Cresswell had an okay game against Crystal Palace, but I think this is what we'll probably do. It may be that he brings in Cresswell into this back three and pushes Alvarez into the midfield. It may be that he brings in Cresswell to the back three, pushes Wan-Bissaka out to this position here where Kufal is, and Kufal gets dropped to the bench. That's a really interesting point. But against Aston Villa in the second half, Kufal was actually the one to come in at this right centre back role, and he didn't have the discipline for it. He didn't have the understanding for playing in that back three. And Kufal was actually the one being dragged out of position a lot of the time. And we found ourselves in a really difficult situation with what was happening because, you know, if we swap this around very quickly, we had it like this. And Rodgers actually was the one on the day who was just drifting out into this space here. And Kufal was just sticking with him like glue, but it was leaving a huge space in behind. And we had this situation where there was just so much space in behind, and you know Villa killed us in transition between the lines, and we just really struggled. But in this game, we're probably going to see. I would expect that Graham Potter will learn from that, and he'll play either Kufal at wing back, or as I said, he'll bring in Cresswell and play Wan-Bissaka at right wing back. So it's interesting to see how we're going to line up. Again, you look at the midfield profile of Souček and Rodriguez. How are we going to play here if these do play? Will we maybe bring in someone like Soler instead of a Rodriguez or a Souček? Again, questions Graham Potter will have to answer, and we will find out on Sunday. But I would expect us to play in this back three again. We've seen it before with Graham Potter, that this is what we want to do. I don't think he's going to adventure outside of that, especially against a team like Aston Villa that have an abundance of quality. You know, as I mentioned, Rodgers, Ramsey, if they play Buendia, Watkins. Watkins is someone that always causes us problems because of the type of style of player he is. But what West Ham did really well in the first half against Aston Villa in the FA Cup is they actually built up with the back three really nicely. And then you had Emerson and Kufal pushing high, or it was Somerville in this case that was actually playing in this position and providing an overload in this area. And Aston Villa, they didn't really have the mineral. I think it was Maatsen actually playing left back on the day instead of Digne, but we were just creating overloads down this side of the pitch. And what we actually tried to do, as we highlighted in the review, is what Graham Potter likes to do with a box. So if you can visualize it here, let me remove that. With Kudus, and if it's going to be Somerville, you can see the box formation for kind of going here. What this will allow is space for Emerson, space for whoever's going to be out here, whether it's Kufal or Wan-Bissaka, to push on. And it almost becomes a solid three here. You've got your Souček and Rodriguez pivot, and then you've got your front four behind, say, a Paqueta, who I think is probably going to play striker on the day. Let me just remove that. But you can see how it can transform. And you've got Alvarez, if he's going to play into that centre-back position, who I would expect to do that because he's played centre-back a lot for Mexico. He's done it throughout his career. He's probably the realistic option to go in there. You see him come into this, pivot here, and then you've got a really solid base. And then you've got Somerville here and Kudus, who can play between the lines. And then you see it becomes like a front five. And that's where the attacking nature of Graham Potter's systems will flourish when the personnel is there and when the understanding is there. This front five here has enough quality to hurt teams. Even with Kufel, I mean, even if this was Wan-Bissaka, I would say even more so, because Wan-Bissaka's been, actually surprisingly very good going forwards for West Ham so far. But this is what we want to get ourselves into situations like this. What we don't want, though, is the turnovers, because Ramsey, excellent ball carrier. Rodgers, excellent ball carrier. Tielemans, fantastic passer of the ball. Kamara, great shielder of the ball. Buendia, a creative number 10. So, and then you've got Watkins running in behind. So it's very, very easy for West Ham to get caught out in these positions if A, we commit too many players forward, and B, we don't have this structure behind it and we're too far back. So what we don't want to see is where we're in situations like where we've gone high up like this, Emerson and Kufal pushing up really high. Defensively, we've pinned Aston Villa back, or we're progressing with the ball like we saw in the first half of the FA Cup. But this unit has to move up, and it has to be ready for what's going to happen. My concern is having Souček and Rodriguez in that midfield pivot. It's extremely slow. It's extremely immobile. And playing in this Graham Potter system, yes, it will offer a level of control with Rodriguez in the midfield. It doesn't offer that much security in transition. And as I mentioned, Ramsey and Rodgers, they'll breeze past Rodriguez. They'll breeze past Souček if they're carrying the ball, which is my main concern. However, when we look at Aston Villa and how they're going to play, obviously we would expect West Ham to be a lot more compact throughout the game. We'll see Emerson drop in. We'll see Kufal drop in. So it's going to be almost this back five shape. Souček and Rodriguez just between those lines there. Let's move him back in there. And then you've got your front three. What we saw against Aston Villa that was working well in the first half was we had two number 10s. So it was actually Paqueta. Let's move Paqueta there just for ease of what we saw last time. And Kudus either side of Fulkirk. Paqueta was just dropping into this space here, and everything what we want to do with a Graham Potter system is force teams into the wide areas. We want to congest this central zone as much as possible. So what we saw is this, and then when we needed to, Paqueta was doubling up with Emerson, Souček would shift across, or vice versa with Kudus and Kufal, and then we'd almost have like Fulkirk just drop in here. So actually, it's a very defensively structured back three, back five when we're out of possession, when we're not suffering a transition. This is if we've got time to get compact. Aston Villa, let's imagine they're up on the halfway line here. Ramsey, as I said, Rodgers, they're probably going to be Aston Villa's wide players in this game. It may be someone like Leon Bailey, and Rodgers comes into the number 10. But Aston Villa are going to look to pin us back as much as possible. But what Graham Potter's going to want to do is, again, even if someone like Tielemans, who's been playing further forwards for Aston Villa because Onana's been playing in here, but if he's dropping into this deeper position, we need to be very careful of the fact that Aston Villa were very good at creating overloads in the second half, and we weren't able to deal with it. They were playing between the lines too easy. This spacing wasn't structured enough. In the first half, we were pretty much like this. This was really difficult for Aston Villa to break through. And then we had the threat of, say, Somerville over here. Scarles on the day was like left wing back. So we had the pace, we had the options to go forwards. What we don't want to see is situations where we're like this, but we're pinned back in and we're not being able to pose a threat on Aston Villa, because, we've seen Aston Villa, they will play a high line like this. They're going to look to really squeeze us up. They're going to look to overload with Cash. They're going to look to overload with Digne. They're going to keep Kamara in that position. But, Tielemans is going to be the one that can go further forwards. And it's going to be a really difficult situation. But you can see here what the point of this is. If Kudus is dropping in here, we've got a 3v2. And then you're asking Buendia to kind of get involved, or Tielemans to come in. But then that draws players out, and that will create space or isolations on, say, someone like Tyrone Mings, which Kudus could have a lot of attacking threat against. So we need to be careful of this, but as this is what concerns me here. So this is all well and good, forcing teams wide in these positions. But when we get into these positions, or say Aston Villa work the ball into here, what are we then going to do in this position? Because Kudus can't do this for 90 minutes. Paqueta won't do this for 90 minutes either. And as the game progresses, we're going to start to see this, where Paqueta and Kudus are a little bit higher up, and our backline is still dropping in the same shape. But then you've got the space for Ramsey. Let's say Tielemans has come into here. We're going to start to see, actually, West Ham are the team getting overloaded which you can see here, 4v3, whether that's Ramsey running in behind, whether that's Tillemans coming into this position, allowing Ramsey to make these runs in between the channels, whether Ramsey's coming on the overlap to Digne or providing an overlap here, and then, someone like Buendia's picking up this pocket. This is where we need to be very careful, because Aston Villa have the quality to play like that. And that's what concerns me, especially going into the second half, where we are going to fatigue, we are going to tire, and the game's going to become a little bit more stretched. And this compact shape that we saw in the first half against Aston Villa is going to become a really difficult one to defend against. If things aren't going well for Villa, I mean, we saw it didn't really work out for them against Monaco. They still lost the game, but it shows the intent behind what Unai Emery will do. He actually was brave enough to go to a back three. So what he did was dropped Kamara into a back three like this, and then almost matched what West Ham would be doing. However, they just had one holding midfielder. It was actually Tillemans on this occasion. So let's just move it here. So they had this free here, and then they had Digne and Cash really high and wide, and then they had two strikers up top with Duran and Watkins, and then they played like this system here. So it was really interesting to see how Unai Emery tried to change the game. It didn't work against Monaco, but he won't be afraid to do something like this. And again, this is something where we need to be very careful. It will create space for us on the counter attack if we do find ourselves in this situation. But we need to be very careful. And again, this Souček Rodriguez double pivot is what concerns me if we go with it. Even if it's someone like Alvarez and Souček, or Alvarez and Rodriguez, we just lack mobility. We lack it really badly. And with a team like Aston Villa, with Rodgers and Ramsey and, these ball carriers that can really disrupt between the lines, it's going to be an incredibly difficult game for West Ham. But yeah, I mean, there's not much more else I can say. That's kind of how I view it. I think our biggest success is going to come from those transitions, especially in the first half, and how effective we are going forwards. And secondly, whether we can maintain that threat going into the second half, and whether we drop too deep, or whether the spaces between the back four and the midfield, or the midfield and the front line, get too big. And that's exactly what we saw at Villa Park in the FA Cup game, where fatigue just killed us, and Villa's quality shone through in the end. But yeah, it's going to be a tough game. Let me know your score predictions in the comments. I'm realistic with this one. It's an incredibly difficult game to go to. But I'm hoping myself and the other traveling fans that are going up there at Villa Park on Sunday do have something to to get behind. We saw that in the FA Cup for large parts. We saw a team that was really trying, a cohesive unit. I want to see that again at Villa Park. I want us to be really tough to beat, and almost do what Crystal Palace did to us on Saturday. Be really, really compact, really difficult, but then have the quality in those moments to transition. It was Eze and Mateta that were the difference in the second half against West Ham. I want to see Paqueta and Kudus take the reins on this one. I want to see Somerville, come into the game if he's playing. I want to see these types of profiles step up in situations where it's going to matter. Someone like Kudus, massive game for you. Absolutely massive. He's come under heavy scrutiny from the West Ham fans in the last few games. This is the type of game where you can really excel against a high line, against a team that are going to leave spaces on the transition. And yeah, still also have that defensive discipline to help out and, block those central spaces and force Aston Villa wide. But yeah, in terms of what I predict the score is going to be, I think it will be similar. I think it may be 2 or 3-1 to Aston Villa. I do think we'll pose enough of a threat to score. As I mentioned at the start, Aston Villa's defensive record this season hasn't been great. They're still trying to juggle, Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday, Wednesday, whatever it is. So it's going to be an interesting game. Definitely one we can get something from, but it's going to be incredibly difficult to do so. But if we make it difficult, stay compact, stay resilient, and break in the moments where we need to, and then control the game where we need to. I think that's also a really key point. In the second half against Aston Villa in the FA Cup, we lost complete control when we had the ball. We didn't really have that in the first half against Aston Villa. We kept the ball quite nicely. There were moments where we went long and lost it, in stupid positions. But in the second half, we were losing the ball in dangerous positions and consistently. And we weren't able to pose any attacking threat, again, due to the substitutions, fatigue, everything I've already said. But yeah, I'm going to go with a 2-1 Aston Villa win again. I think they might just edge it, but I do believe we could get something from this game if we stick to what I've said there. But again, it's a different thing, me saying it and the players executing it, especially with the injuries we've got, and especially with Aston Villa's quality. And Unai Emery is flexibility tactically in matches. But yeah, let me know your predictions in the comments. Are you looking forward to the game? Who would you start? Would you change anything from that lineup that I've just put out there? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the breakdown, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. And until the next one, come on, you Irons.